This is GhanaNewspapers Newsroom. Live coverage. Real-time updates. Preserving Ghana's story. Empowering its digital future.
Hello, and welcome to GhanaNewspapers Newsroom. I am Nana Kwaku Owahin Achimpong, and this is a very special moment for us, our very first episode. We are delighted to bring you credible, balanced, and timely news that informs, educates, and keeps you connected to the stories that matter most in Ghana and beyond. As we begin this journey together, kindly subscribe to our YouTube channel, click the bell icon to receive notifications for all our latest updates, and follow and like GhanaNewspapers on all our social media platforms. Thank you for being part of this historic start. Now, let's take a look at the story in detail. The first English newspaper on the continent of Africa was published in Cape Town in 1800. The first African-produced paper in West Africa was Charles Bannerman's Accra Herald. The West Africa magazine was published in London in 1917. Africans in East Africa were not as well served by the press as in West Africa. In South Africa, the first African-edited paper was Isijidimi Samakosa. That concludes our report on the early newspapers in Africa and the powerful role they played in shaping political thought, resistance, and African identity. We take you back more than 2 centuries, to the very beginning of journalism in what is now Ghana. This is the story of the birth of the Gold Coast Press. In the year 1822, under British colonial rule, a quiet but historic milestone was reached in Cape Coast. The British colonial administration introduced what would become the first newspaper in the Gold Coast, the Royal Gold Coast Gazette and Commercial Intelligencer. This moment marked the formal beginning of structured journalism in the region. Unlike the newspapers we know today, this publication was handwritten, modest in circulation, and semi-official in nature. Its primary audience consisted of colonial officers, European merchants, and Christian missionaries operating within the colony. The paper carried shipping schedules, trade announcements, administrative proclamations, and official notices, serving as a central channel of information in a growing colonial economy. Though limited in reach, its significance was profound. For the first time, information in the Gold Coast was systematically gathered, organized, and distributed, laying the foundation for West African print culture. Published in Cape Coast, Ghana, the Royal Gold Coast Gazette circulated between April 21, 1822 and 1825. It was edited and published by Sir Charles McCarthy, then governor of the British Gold Coast settlements. Historians describe it as a semi-official organ of colonial government, created to serve administrative needs while also shaping public opinion. According to scholar Jennifer Hastie, the paper also pursued a secondary objective: to influence a growing class of mission-educated Africans. By promoting literacy and rural development, the colonial administration sought to secure loyalty and conformity, while quietly suppressing emerging political ambitions among local elites. Yet, history would take an unexpected turn. By the mid-19th century, African elites began to appropriate the power of print for themselves. One of the earliest examples was the Accra Herald, founded by Charles Bannerman, the son of a British lieutenant governor and an Asani royal princess. Like its predecessor, the Accra Herald was handwritten, but unlike the Colonial Gazette, 2/3 of its approximately 300 subscribers were African. The paper endured for 16 years, and its success ignited a wave of African-owned newspapers toward the end of the 19th century, reshaping Ghana's media landscape forever. Meanwhile, Governor Sir Charles McCarthy's own story ended tragically. He was killed during the First Ashanti War, an event that further strained relations between British forces and coastal communities. Historical accounts claim his skull was taken as a war trophy, a symbol of the deep conflicts that defined that era. At least 2 more Ashanti wars would follow in the 19th century, from a handwritten colonial gazette in 1822 to a vibrant, independent press today. The journey of journalism in Ghana is one of power, resistance, and transformation. And it all began here, with ink, paper, and the birth of the Gold Coast Press. You're watching history unfold. Stay with us for more stories that shape who we are.
Tonight, we examine one of the most enduring challenges in Ghana's national story: corruption. It is a problem often discussed in the present, but its roots run far deeper, stretching back to the colonial Gold Coast era, and continuing to shape governance, public trust, and development in modern Ghana. To understand why corruption has proven so difficult to eradicate, we must first understand where it began. Formal British colonial administration of the Gold Coast began in 1821, when the British Crown took control from private trading companies. By the late 19th century, especially after the declaration of the Gold Coast as a Crown colony in 1874, corruption had become embedded. British officials relied heavily on local chiefs, clerks, court interpreters, and tax collectors to administer justice and regulate trade. This system, while efficient for imperial control, created fertile ground for bribery, favoritism, and abuse of authority. Historical records reveal troubling patterns. Court cases were sometimes influenced by bribes. Customs officials altered duties in favor of certain traders, and some chiefs imposed illegal levies on local populations. Though colonial authorities officially condemned corruption, enforcement was uneven and selective. Abuses that supported imperial economic interests, particularly in cocoa production and mineral extraction, were often ignored. In 1957, Ghana achieved independence. There was widespread hope that African self-rule would dismantle these corrupt colonial systems. Under Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, the new nation pursued rapid industrialization and state-led development. But the early years of nationhood revealed new challenges. Political power concentration led to growing allegations of mismanagement. These concerns became central to the justification of the 1966 military coup, which cited corruption as a reason for intervention. What followed was a prolonged period of political instability. Between 1966 and 1992, Ghana experienced multiple coups. Key regimes during this period included the National Redemption Council, the Armed Forces Revolutionary Council, and the PNDC. While some officials were disciplined, authoritarian rule and economic hardship often deepened corruption rather than eliminated it. In 1992, Ghana entered a new chapter. The Fourth Republic introduced constitutional democracy and institutions for accountability. These included Parliament, the Commission on Human Rights and Administrative Justice, and the Office of the Special Prosecutor. Yet, despite these reforms, corruption remains a major concern. It surfaces through procurement fraud and inflated public contracts. International assessments consistently reflect public frustration, even as Ghana maintains a reputation for democratic stability. So why has corruption endured for so long? Experts point to a combination of factors, starting with colonial administrative legacies, economic inequality, political interference, and the social normalization of informal payments as survival strategies. It now affects everyday life, from healthcare and education to land administration and justice. Yet, the story is not without hope. Investigative journalism and civil society activism are increasingly challenging impunity. Digital transparency and youth-led advocacy are not about assigning blame. They are about gaining insight for lasting reform. This is not just history, it is a national conversation, and it continues. Kindly subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon to receive notifications for all our latest updates. And follow and like GhNewspapers on all our social media platforms. Now the story. Few modern technologies have transformed Ghana as deeply and as quickly as financial technology, fintech. What began as simple mobile phone services has grown into a powerful digital financial ecosystem, reshaping banking, trade, and daily survival for millions of Ghanaians. For decades after independence, Ghana's financial system revolved around traditional banks concentrated mainly in urban centers. Rural communities relied heavily on cash, informal savings, and rotating credit systems, commonly known as susu. By the late 1990s, less than 30% of adults had access to formal banking, limiting economic inclusion and business growth. The introduction of mobile telephony in 1996 quietly laid the foundation for digital finance. As phone ownership expanded in the early 2000s, telecom companies began exploring services beyond voice calls. The real breakthrough came after 2008, with improved internet connectivity following the landing of submarine cables. In 2009, mobile money services were introduced in Ghana, allowing users to send and receive money, pay bills, and store value digitally. Strong regulatory support from the Bank of Ghana, together with interoperability, accelerated nationwide adoption. By the mid-2010s, mobile money had reached traders, drivers, farmers, and market women, groups long excluded from traditional banking. From 2016 onward, fintech startups and banks embraced digital innovation, offering mobile banking apps, digital loans, QR payments, and online remittances. A key milestone came in 2018 with the launch of mobile money interoperability. Mobile money accounts soon surpassed traditional bank accounts. Today, Ghana is recognized as a fintech leader in West Africa. Digital payments now drive commerce, improve tax collection, and strengthen financial transparency. Fintech has expanded financial inclusion nationwide, empowered small businesses and informal traders, reduced cash handling risks, and positioned Ghana as a regional digital finance hub. What banks struggled to achieve in decades, fintech delivered in years. As Ghana moves toward digital currencies, AI-driven finance, and cross-border payments, fintech remains a central pillar of economic modernization. This story proves that technology, when accessible and regulated wisely, can change lives at scale. In 1996, mobile telephony was introduced. In 2009, mobile money was launched. In 2018, mobile money interoperability began. And in the 2020s, fintech became central to Ghana's economy. Sources include the Bank of Ghana, the World Bank, the National Communications Authority, GSMA reports, and IMF country assessments on Ghana. That concludes our report on the fintech revolution, how digital finance changed Ghana more than any bank ever did. In 1858, Charles Bannerman founded the Accra Herald, recognized as the first African-produced newspaper in West Africa. The son of a British lieutenant governor and an Asante princess, Bannerman embodied both colonial and indigenous worlds. Unlike the colonial-run press, this handwritten paper reached primarily African readers, circulating among some 300 subscribers. It focused on local issues and civic import, marking a turning point where journalism became a platform for local voices. The paper ran for 16 years and encouraged the growth of indigenous journalism across the entire region. The Accra Herald deliberately shifted attention toward African-centered issues, including local governance and social conditions. Today, the Accra Herald is regarded as a foundational pillar, redefining journalism as a vehicle for African agency. That concludes our report on the mid-19th century press expansion. Thank you for watching Ghana Newspapers Newsroom. Once again, I am Nana Kweku Owahene Acheampong. Stay informed and have a good day.
Hello viewers, I am Hannah. Welcome to the Ghana Newspapers Newsroom. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, click the bell icon to receive notifications for all our latest updates, and follow and like GH Newspapers on all our social media platforms. The slave trade and demographic devastation. When we talk about Africa today, its borders, its languages, its religions, its politics, we are also talking about colonialism. The Africa we know in the 21st century did not emerge naturally from the past. It was profoundly shaped by centuries of foreign intrusion, exploitation, and rule. To understand present-day Africa, we must first understand how colonialism transformed it. The story begins even before formal colonial rule. Between the 15th and 19th centuries, European powers participated in the transatlantic slave trade. Millions of Africans were captured, sold, and shipped across the Atlantic Ocean to work on plantations in the Americas. They were forcibly taken from their homes, families, and communities. This mass removal of people had devastating consequences. Entire regions were depopulated. The majority of those captured were young and strong individuals in their productive years. Their absence weakened local economies and social structures. Communities lost not only their numbers but also their strength and stability. The slave trade also fueled violence within Africa. Warfare increased, suspicion and mistrust spread. Even before formal conquest, the continent had already been deeply wounded. Then came the period known as the Scramble for Africa. European leaders met and divided Africa among themselves, drawing borders without African participation. These boundaries remain largely in place today. Many borders did not follow ethnic or historical lines. Some communities were split across multiple territories, while rival groups were forced into single political units. These divisions later contributed to political tensions and conflicts after independence. Cultural transformation and language. Colonialism reshaped culture and introduced European languages into governance, education, and public life. These languages became associated with power and opportunity, while indigenous languages were often marginalized. Religious change and missionary expansion. Colonial rule also brought significant religious transformation. Missionaries spread Christianity alongside education, reshaping social norms and spiritual practices across many regions. Economic restructuring and dependency. Colonial administrations reorganized African economies to serve external interests. Infrastructure was built mainly to extract resources for export rather than develop local industries. This created patterns of economic dependency that continue today. Political centralization and post-independence challenges. Colonial governments centralized authority and reshaped traditional governance systems. After independence, many African nations inherited administrative structures designed for control rather than inclusive participation. Despite these challenges, African societies resisted colonial rule through revolts, intellectual movements, and nationalist campaigns that eventually led to independence across the continent. Colonialism transformed Africa demographically, politically, culturally, economically, and socially. Its legacy continues to shape modern realities, influencing borders, institutions, identities, and development patterns. Understanding this history is essential for understanding Africa today. During the colonial period in the Gold Coast, modern-day Ghana, newspapers were not merely instruments of public communication, they were powerful tools of governance and political control. Colonial governors recognized early that controlling the flow of information was essential for maintaining authority, shaping public opinion, and managing resistance. Through censorship laws, strategic propaganda, selective reporting, and alliances with missionary presses, colonial administrations used newspapers to construct narratives that legitimized imperial rule while suppressing dissenting voices. The early colonial information environment. In the mid-19th century, the Gold Coast media landscape was limited and tightly connected to colonial institutions. Early newspapers often depended on printing presses owned by missionary societies or government offices. Because printing infrastructure was scarce and expensive, colonial authorities could exert significant influence over which publications were allowed to operate. Official gazettes and government messaging. One of the primary methods of information control was the use of official government publications. Colonial administrations produced gazettes that published laws, proclamations, and administrative decisions. These publications framed government policies in authoritative language emphasizing order, progress, and legitimacy. Press laws and censorship mechanisms. As African-owned newspapers began to emerge, colonial authorities introduced legal frameworks requiring licenses and imposing strict regulations. These mechanisms allowed governors to suppress publications deemed threatening to colonial stability and encourage self-censorship among editors. Strategic propaganda and narrative control. Colonial governors also used newspapers to disseminate propaganda reinforcing imperial ideology. Articles often emphasized economic development, legal reforms, and cooperation between British authorities and African leaders. Collaboration with missionary presses. Missionary societies operated many early printing presses, and colonial administrations often worked with them to distribute official messaging and shape public discourse. Monitoring and countering African nationalist journalism. As nationalist newspapers emerged, colonial authorities intensified surveillance, monitored content, and issued counter-narratives to maintain political control. Wartime information control. During global conflicts, stricter censorship policies required newspapers to support recruitment campaigns and promote loyalty to the empire. Long-term implications. Colonial information control shaped media regulation traditions and influenced the growth of politically conscious readerships that later supported independence movements. Conclusion. Colonial governors strategically used newspapers to control information, shape public opinion, and maintain authority. Yet African journalists ultimately challenged these narratives, demonstrating the enduring power of the press as both a tool of control and a vehicle for resistance. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, click the bell icon to receive notifications for all our latest updates, and follow and like GhNewspapers on all our social media platforms. The concept of chief's consent occupies a central place in the colonial history of the Gold Coast, present-day Ghana. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, colonial authorities frequently claimed that African chiefs willingly agreed to treaties, land concessions, and administrative reforms that facilitated British control. Newspapers, both colonial and African-run, played a decisive role in shaping how this consent was portrayed, interpreted, and contested. The framing of chiefs' consent in the media reveals how journalism functioned as a political instrument in legitimizing or challenging colonial power. Traditional authority before colonial rule. Before European colonial consolidation, chiefs in the Gold Coast wielded authority through complex political systems rooted in lineage, customary law, and community accountability. Among Akan states such as Asante and Fante, chiefs governed with the advice of councils of elders, and their legitimacy depended on public support. Consent in this context was not an individual decision, but a collective process. Major political agreements, including alliances and trade negotiations, required consultation within traditional governance structures. However, European colonial administrators often misunderstood or deliberately simplified these systems, treating chiefs as absolute rulers capable of unilaterally granting consent on behalf of their people. Early treaties and colonial narratives. One of the most significant examples of media framing occurred following the signing of the Bond of 1844. This agreement between British officials and several coastal chiefs established British judicial authority in parts of the Gold Coast. Colonial newspapers portrayed the bond as a voluntary request by chiefs seeking protection and legal reform. Reports emphasized the narrative that African leaders had willingly embraced British governance to end barbaric practices such as human sacrifice. In reality, historical evidence suggests a far more complex situation. Many chiefs faced economic pressures, military threats, and shifting trade dynamics that constrained their choices. Moreover, the extent of consultation within local communities varied significantly. Media framing strategies. Newspapers used several strategies to shape public perceptions of chiefs' consent. Personalization of authority. Colonial press reports often focused on individual chiefs rather than collective decision-making bodies. Moral justification narrative. Articles frequently framed chiefs' consent as a moral endorsement of colonial rule. Silence on coercion. Media reports rarely acknowledged the power imbalances underlying treaty negotiations. African newspapers and counterframing. By the late 19th century, African-owned newspapers began to challenge colonial narratives. Writers argued that chiefs' consent was often misrepresented, and that colonial authorities selectively interpreted agreements to expand control. They emphasized that many treaties were intended as limited partnerships rather than permanent transfers of sovereignty. The role of language and translation. Another crucial factor in media framing was language. Many treaties were drafted in English, while negotiations occurred in local languages through interpreters. Differences in translation often created misunderstandings about the scope and meaning of agreements. Long-term political consequences. The media framing of chiefs' consent had lasting implications for colonial governance and nationalist politics. By portraying chiefs as willing collaborators, colonial authorities justified indirect rule systems. Nationalist movements later revisited these narratives to challenge colonial legitimacy. Post-colonial reassessment. Following independence, historians critically reassessed colonial-era media narratives, highlighting the complex interplay of coercion, negotiation, and agency in treaty-making processes. Conclusion: media framing of African chiefs' consent illustrates how newspapers shaped historical narratives to serve competing political agendas and demonstrates the enduring power of journalism in shaping political memory. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, click the bell icon to receive notifications for all our latest updates, and follow and like GhNewspapers on all our social media platforms. The first English newspaper on the continent of Africa was published in Cape Town in 1800. The following year in Sierra Leone, the Royal Gazette and Sierra Leone Advertiser were published in Freetown. Both were European undertakings concerned with matters of government. In 1826, Charles Force, an American freed slave, published the Liberia Herald. He died some months later, but the title was revived in 1830 by Edward Blyden, the anti-colonial thinker and academic, who moved from the Caribbean island of St. Thomas to Liberia. This marked the beginning of an African press that was critical of the European presence in Africa. From the mid-19th century onwards, several papers were published in Luanda, Angola, by a distinct group of educated mixed-race Mesticos Angolans. José de Fontes Pereira and Joaquim Dias Cordeiro da Mata were regular contributors, writing articles highly critical of Portuguese rule. West African newspapers. The first African-produced paper in West Africa was Charles Bannerman's Accra Herald, produced in 1858 in the Gold Coast, modern Ghana. The following year, the first Yoruba newspaper was produced, Iwe Ihorin, the paper with the news, which cost 30 cowrie shells. In 1863, a West Indian immigrant called Professor Robert Campbell brought out the Anglo-African. We were favored with sight of the beautiful baptismal present our beloved Queen has made to the infant of Mrs. J.P.L. Davies of Lagos, a lady well known as having enjoyed the high honor of being a protege of Her Majesty. The cup and salver are both inscribed as follows: to Victoria Davies, Queen Victoria. Excerpt from the Anglo-African newsletter, 3rd Oct 1863, on the occasion of the birth of a baby born to the leading African trader J.P.L. Davies and his wife, who was goddaughter to the Queen. In 1926, in Lagos, Nigeria's most enduring and popular newspaper, the Nigerian Daily Times, was published. Its editor, Ernest Ikoli, was also head of the renowned school, King's College, Lagos, and considered an outstanding man in his day. The paper was published on a sound commercial basis, carrying a lot of expatriate advertising, but it could be critical of the colonial establishment. The appointment of Mr. Ojibowu MABCL Oxon as police magistrate in Lagos is no more than an experiment. Astonishingly, no African has been found qualified to be on the judicial staff in the newly constituted protectorate courts. Daily Times, 12 Dec 1936. West Africa Magazine. The West Africa Magazine was published in London in 1917 with the commercial backing of the Elder Dempster Shipping Line and the John Holt Trading Company. Although published in London, its editor set out to create a magazine that served as an open forum for discussing all questions affecting the welfare of people, both African and European. There were contributions from colonial officials and expatriates, but also from the educated African urban elite, including Gold Coast nationalist Kobina Seki. The most dynamic and energetic West African journalist in the 1930s was the nationalist Nnamdi Azikiwe, later to be the first president of Nigeria. He had been educated in America and strongly influenced by black radical journalism there. He established the African Morning Post with Ita Wallace Johnson. They described it as independent in all things and neutral in nothing affecting the destiny of Africa. In 1927, Azikwe established the West African Pilot in Lagos. Its lively mix of radical politics, gossip, plus a woman's page proved very popular. The Comet was another popular Nigerian publication, edited by a radical Egyptian Jus Mohammed Ali, who had been educated in London. The Comet kept a keen eye on events at home and abroad. Native or foreigner, which are you? There are many differences quickly found between the different races, but the only essential differential is living in a different place, yet such is the pride of the prideful man. From Austrians to Australians, that wherever he is, he regards it as his, and the natives as aliens. Published in Sierra Leone Weekly News, 19 Dec 1936. Sin-possessed and intoxicated with authority, Mussolini, the fascist dictator, with his smash-and-grab doctrine of civilization, has announced his East African spoils to the world. He is also said to be having his hands in the Spanish mists. This is as should be expected of a child of darkness. He must always be found in the misty corners of the world. Thereby we find his brother Hitler, the German dictator, dreaming his usual daydreams, a German empire with Russia as his armrest, France as his footstool, England as his manufacturing nation, and the colonies as laborers to work in his Nazi vineyard. His continuous dream is of world subjugation. The Comet, 5 Dec 1936. In French West Africa, the press was dominated by French publishers. The first major African publication was La Voix du Dahomey in 1927. More papers followed in the Ivory Coast and Senegal. East Africa. Africans in East Africa were not as well served by the press as in West Africa. By the 1930s, the English-speaking press was dominated by the Standard Group, whose titles included the East African Standard, originally the African Standard started by the Asian journalist A.M. Jivanji, the Mombasa Times, the Tanganyika Standard, and the Uganda Argus. The African-run press in East Africa took off in the 1920s and 1930s. One of the earliest known newspapers in an African language was Sekenyola, published in 1920, written in Luganda and aimed at the Baganda in Uganda and Kenya. The Kampala suburb of Katwe was known as the Flea Street of Uganda. Other Luganda titles included Gambus, which came out in 1927, and Dobzi Iya Buganda in 1928. The first Gikuyu paper was Muigwithania, which was initially published in 1925 and was edited by the future president of Kenya, Jomo Kenyatta. He also sponsored other political publications in Gikuyu. The other notable Swahili title was Kwetu, edited by Muganda Eric Fiar. South Africa. In South Africa, the first African edited paper was Isigidimi Sama Shosa. It came out in 1876 with the backing of the Lovedale Missionary Press. One of its editors, John Tengo Jabavu, a devout Methodist and Pan-Africanist, was educated in Britain and America, then went on to publish and edit Imvoza Bansundu in 1884. This was a bilingual paper with an English and Xhosa-speaking readership. In 1903, John L. Dube, later to be president of the ANC, published Ilanga Lasi Natal. Once the ANC became established as the leading opponent to white rule, it voiced its concerns primarily through the publication Abantu Bato. It survived attempts to close it down by the authorities, but finally folded for financial reasons. The fortunes of the African press in South Africa reflected the slow and uneven march towards segregation and the loss of rights experienced by Black South Africans. The main newspaper group to emerge in the 1930s was the Argus Group. It saw profit in publishing titles for Black as well as white readers. It bought up the Bantu Press, which had several successful titles read by Black South Africans, and removed all the Africans employed in management. By World War II, there were only 3 Black-owned and edited newspapers, 2 of which were published by the Communist Party of South Africa, including the Socialist Worker. During the years leading up to the Second World War, all the newspapers, both European and African, keenly observed events in Europe and debated the implications for Africa. When the war was in progress, the newspapers in English and French colonial Africa broadly supported the Allies. Only a few spoke out against supporting the war effort. Enlist today. Your country needs you, not for learning how to shoot the big howitzers or how to rat-tat-tat the machine guns. or how to fly over peaceful countries dropping bombs on harmless people, or how to fix a bayonet and charge at the harmless workers of another clime. Your country needs you for the rebuilding of your shattered homeland. Your homeland is ruined by exploitation, by the tyrants of foreign nations, who would use you as their cat's paw while they starved you to subjection. George Padmore's pacifist poem, published in the African Standard 28 July 1939, 2 months before war broke out. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, click the bell icon to receive notifications for all our latest updates, and follow and like GhNewspapers on all our social media platforms. The development of newspaper culture in the Gold Coast, today known as Ghana, was inseparable from the spread of formal education during the 19th and early 20th centuries. Education did far more than teach reading and writing. It fundamentally reshaped social structures, created new intellectual classes, and fostered habits of information consumption. As literacy expanded through mission schools, government institutions, and private academies, newspapers emerged as essential tools for communication, political engagement, and social transformation. In this way, education served as the primary gateway through which newspaper readership took root and expanded in colonial Ghana. Early literacy and pre-colonial communication. Before the introduction of Western-style education, communication relied heavily on oral traditions, public gatherings, and community leadership structures. The transition from oral to written communication marked a profound cultural shift, enabling the emergence of print media and a new relationship between citizens and information. Missionary education and literacy expansion. Missionary institutions established schools that expanded literacy and produced generations capable of reading printed materials, unintentionally fostering broader intellectual and political awareness. Colonial government schools and administrative needs. Government schools reinforced literacy as a practical necessity for employment and created a standardized language environment that supported newspaper readership. Emergence of an educated African elite. Education produced influential groups who became both consumers and producers of newspapers, transforming print media into platforms for debate and political engagement. Schools as distribution hubs. Educational institutions became centers for newspaper circulation and reading culture development. Education, nationalism, and political awareness. Educated readers used newspapers to follow political developments and support movements advocating change. Long-term societal impact. The relationship between education and media consumption continues to influence democratic participation and civic awareness. Conclusion. Education served as the essential gateway to newspaper consumption by creating a literate population capable of engaging with written information and fostering lasting connections between learning, media, and civic life. Thank you for watching Ghana Newspapers Newsroom. Once again, I am Hannah. Do not forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, click the bell icon for notifications, and follow and like GhNewspapers across all our social media platforms.
Hello, I am Nana Mensah Adinkra. Welcome to the Ghana Newspapers Newsroom. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, click the bell icon to receive notifications for all our latest updates, and follow and like GhNewspapers on all our social media platforms. Punishment is a central feature of every organized society, including Ghana. While rewards are designed to encourage conformity and socially approved behavior, punishment exists to negatively sanction deviant behavior. When individuals act in ways that align with societal norms, they are often rewarded. When they violate those norms, society, or its authorized agents such as the courts, police, prisons, customary authorities, and religious institutions, responds with punishment. In Ghana, punishment operates at multiple levels. It is enforced formally through the state's criminal justice system, including the Ghana Police Service, the courts, and correctional institutions. It is also enforced informally through traditional councils, family elders, chiefs, churches, mosques, and community opinion. At its core, punishment is a mechanism of social control. It signals what a society considers unacceptable and enforces compliance with its moral, legal, and cultural rules. In Ghana, these rules are shaped simultaneously by statutory law, customary law, and religious norms. Scholars who study punishment, known as penologists, identify four main goals of punishment that guide criminal justice systems across the world, including Ghana's: retribution, deterrence, incapacitation, rehabilitation. Ghana's criminal justice system combines all four principles. Retribution is the idea that offenders should be punished because they deserve it. The focus here is not on reforming the offender or preventing future crime, but on moral retaliation, paying the offender back for the harm caused. In Ghanaian society, retributive thinking extends beyond formal law. Many Ghanaians believe strongly that wrongdoing must be paid for. The popular saying, "Niawai no wobetua," you will pay for what you have done, reflects this deep cultural belief. Capital punishment remains a powerful symbol of retributive justice. Incapacitation focuses on protecting society by preventing offenders from committing further crimes. Prison sentences remain the most common form of incapacitation in Ghana, particularly for violent and serious offenses. Public debates often call for harsher punishments to ensure public safety. Rehabilitation views crime as a product of social, psychological, or economic challenges. In Ghana, factors such as unemployment and drug abuse shape this perspective. Rehabilitation involves social workers and NGOs working to reform offenders and reintegrate them into society. Deterrence aims to prevent crime by making punishments swift, certain, and severe. There are two types: specific deterrence, targeting the individual, and general deterrence, where punishment serves as a warning to society at large. Punishment remains central to Ghanaian society because it regulates behavior, enforces norms, and preserves social order. Ultimately, punishment in Ghana is not only about crime control. It is about balancing justice, safety, morality, and human dignity in a rapidly changing world. Akan deities and their day names: Onyankopon Kwame, Asase Ya, Po Abena, and Kofi Yesu. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, click the bell icon to receive notifications for all our latest updates, and follow and like GhanaNewspapers on all our social media platforms. Among the Akan of Ghana, naming is never a casual act. Names locate a person in time, history, morality, and the spiritual universe. One of the most distinctive Akan naming practices is the giving of day names, or kradin, assigned according to the day of the week on which a child is born. These names are gendered. Males and females born on the same day receive different names: Kofi and Afua for Friday, Kwame and Ama for Saturday, Yor and Ya for Thursday, Kwabena and Abena for Tuesday, and so on. Day names are far more than convenient markers of birth dates. In Akan thought, they are believed to encode personality traits, temperament, moral disposition, and even destiny. For example, a person born on Monday, Kwadwo or Adwoa, is often said to be calm and reflective, while a Saturday-born person, Kwame or Ama, is thought to be serious-minded, authoritative, and strong-willed. These character attributions are part of everyday Akan social knowledge, often invoked to explain behavior, success, conflict, and interpersonal dynamics. The practice of day naming extends beyond humans to animals prominent in Akan folklore. The Otwa, duiker or deer, may be called Otwe Kwabena, and the tortoise, the quintessential trickster, is known as Kofi Akiekiedi. These names bring animals into the moral and symbolic universe represented by day names. Powerful spiritual beings, including deities and even the supreme god, are sometimes spoken of using day names. Expressions like Onyankopon Kwame, Asase Ya, and Kofi Yesu circulate widely in Akan speech and religious imagination. Orthodox Akan theology teaches that Onyankopon, the supreme being, is uncreated, eternal, and unborn. God is not born and does not enter the world at a specific time. Therefore, Onyankopon does not literally have a day name, as day names presuppose birth and temporality, conditions that do not apply to God. However, attributing day names to God or sacred beings is symbolic and cultural. Calling God Onyankopon Kwame situates the supreme being within Akan cosmology. Saturday, associated with Kwame, is linked to gravity, authority, finality, and seriousness, qualities that reflect the Akan conception of God as powerful and sovereign. Similarly, Asase Ya, Mother Earth, is a feminine spiritual entity associated with fertility, morality, truth, and justice. She is Thursday-born, and Thursday holds ritual significance as the Earth's day of rest. People refrain from farming on Thursdays, respecting the land's Sabbath to avoid misfortune. The sea is also anthropomorphized and given a day name, Po Abena, indicating a Tuesday birth. Tuesday is regarded as the sea's day of rest, and sea-related activities are traditionally discouraged to honor this sacred rule. Likewise, Jesus Christ is localized within Akan culture as Kofi Yesu, a Friday-born name. This cultural practice helps render Christian figures relatable within Akan temporal and symbolic categories. In summary, while God does not literally have a day name, Akan people ascribe day names to divine beings as a way to domesticate the sacred, anchoring transcendent entities within familiar cultural forms. This reflects the Akan genius in weaving the divine into everyday life, the calendar, and the natural world. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Click the bell icon to receive notifications for all our latest updates, and follow and like GhNewspapers on all our social media platforms. Today's topic: African witchcraft versus European and American witchcraft. African witchcraft versus European witchcraft have been the focus of local discussions about witchcraft in Ghana for many years. During the period of European colonization, westernization, and the early stages of modernization, people in the Gold Coast, now Ghana, struggled to explain the wide gap in development between Africans and Europeans. Many ordinary people asked a troubling question: why were Europeans advancing so rapidly while Africans appeared to be lagging behind? One popular explanation at the time was rooted in beliefs about witchcraft. Many people assumed that both Africans and Europeans possessed witchcraft, but that they used it in different ways. According to this view, Europeans used their witchcraft for development and progress, while Africans used theirs for destruction and harm. In the Ghanaian understanding, witchcraft is believed to be a spiritual force possessed by a witch, enabling that person to influence their own life as well as the lives of others, both beneficiaries and victims. Within this framework, African witchcraft was often portrayed as a force used to kill, maim, destroy, cause wars, spread disease, trigger road accidents, and bring about premature death. European or white people's witchcraft, on the other hand, was imagined as productive and beneficial. It was believed to be the power that enabled Europeans to invent machines, build factories, make scientific discoveries, and create robots, and even travel to the moon. This way of thinking led to a damaging conclusion: that African witchcraft was bad witchcraft, while European witchcraft was good witchcraft. In effect, it suggested that Africans were responsible for their own underdevelopment through destructive spiritual practices, while Europeans prospered because they used their powers wisely. This belief was deeply internalized and found expression in popular culture. Several Ghanaian highlife songs reflect this contrast between Ababini Bay, African witchcraft, and Aburoni Bay, white people's witchcraft. In these songs, Aburoni Bay is often described as Bai Papa, good witchcraft used to create and build, while African witchcraft is portrayed as a force of destruction. Notable examples include A.B., Crensel's song Devil, and Nana Ampadu's Akoma Bay Nai. Today, however, many young and educated Africans have moved away from this self-blaming and self-denigrating explanation. There is now greater awareness that Africa's underdevelopment did not result from destructive witchcraft, but from historical and structural forces. Africa's condition is increasingly understood as the outcome of slavery, colonial exploitation, the extraction of natural resources, forced labor, colonial economic systems, neo-colonial control, and unfair international trade practices. These forces systematically drained African societies of wealth and stifled their development, while enriching Europe and North America. This growing awareness has helped many Africans reject the idea that their culture or spirituality is inherently destructive. Instead, it has shifted attention toward the real political and economic processes that shaped global inequality and continues to do so today. Today in our studio, we turn our attention to a deeply troubling but often hidden issue in our society: abuse of house helps in Ghana, the hidden struggles of child domestic workers. In Ghana, there exists a long-standing practice in which some parents send their children to live with other families as house helps. While this arrangement is often justified as a strategy for providing children with better opportunities, it has, in many cases, become a source of profound exploitation and suffering. Many of these children are sent from rural areas to urban centers to provide domestic services for city-based families. The receiving households are usually wealthy or modestly well-to-do, and the children are expected to perform a wide range of household chores, often without pay or formal protection. In some cases, children are effectively rented out, with their parents receiving monthly compensation for the child's labor. These arrangements frequently occur without written agreements, oversight, or clear expectations regarding the child's welfare, education, or working conditions. Media reports and human rights investigations consistently show that many house helps are subjected to various forms of abuse. Ghanaian mass media reports provide disturbing confirmation that the abuse of house helps is not anecdotal but systemic. The plight of house helps in Ghana raises urgent questions about child rights, social inequality, and the moral limits of traditional labor arrangements. While domestic assistance has long existed within Ghanaian society, the exploitation of children under the guise of caregiving represents a profound social failure, one that demands sustained public attention, legal enforcement, and collective moral reckoning. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, click the bell icon to receive notifications for all our latest updates, and follow and like GhNewspapers on all our social media platforms. A new religious movement has emerged in Ghana known as Asomdwe and Tonton Som, a name that translates literally as peace and exaltation religion. Ghana is a deeply multi-religious society, long accustomed to religious plurality. Christianity, represented by historic denominations such as Catholic, Presbyterian, Methodist, Anglican, and Salvation Army, as well as numerous Pentecostal and charismatic movements, dominates the religious landscape. Islam, Buddhism, and other faiths also have established presences in the country. Since 2006, however, Asomdwe and Tonton Som has entered this already crowded religious field and has grown rapidly. With an estimated membership exceeding 30,000 spread across Ghana and the diaspora, the movement presents itself as one of the fastest-growing new religious movements in the country. Its founder and spiritual leader, Okronkronyi Nyame Somafo Yawo, openly proclaims that the movement will ultimately become Ghana's national religion, eclipsing all others. According to him, its future status will parallel that of Islam in Saudi Arabia or Judaism in ancient Israel, serving as the singular religious foundation of the nation. Okronkronyi Nyame Somafo Yawo rejects the characterization of Asomdwe and Tonton Som as a new religion in the sense of novelty. Instead, he teaches that it represents the original form of worship practiced by the Akan people when they lived in ancient Assyria. According to his teachings, the Assyrians later migrated to the land now known as Ghana, bringing with them this primordial religious tradition. Central to his doctrine is the claim that Akan was the name of a historical individual. Okronkronyi Nyame Somafo Yawo teaches that Akan was the first prophet sent by God after the biblical flood of Noah, and that he belonged to a category of exalted spiritual beings known as Elijahs. These Elijahs, he asserts, worship God through exaltation, calling upon the divine name, a form of worship practiced in the highest heavens, closest to God himself. Akan, he claims, had 17 children, all of whom were prophets. God allegedly instructed Akan's 16th child that a promised land had been prepared for them in what is now Ghana and that they should migrate there. After the death of the 16th child, the 17th assumed leadership and led the people from Assyria toward West Africa. When this final leader died in Central Africa, the people, now without prophetic guidance, sought spiritual direction from a spiritualist. According to Okronkronyi Nyame Somafo Yawo, this moment marked the corruption of exaltation worship and the introduction of idol worship, which the people carried with them into present-day Ghana. Okronkronyi Nyame Somafo Yawo further teaches that Ghana is one of 3 divinely selected nations chosen to house God's true religion. As a result, he argues that idolatry must be completely eradicated from Ghanaian society. He presents himself as a divinely commissioned messenger, or Nyame Somafo, sent by the Most High God to purge the nation of evil spirits and idol worship, reunite humanity under a single religious system, and restore what he describes as the only form of worship acceptable to God. According to Okronkronyi Nyame Somafo Yawo, God does not recognize Christianity, Islam, or any other existing religion in Ghana. Only Asomdwe and Tonton Som, centered on exaltation worship, meets divine approval. Within this theological framework, Okronkronyi Nyame Somafo Yawo identifies himself as the Elijah foretold to return in the end times. He describes himself as one of 314 messiahs sent by God throughout history to confront Satan and redeem humanity. He claims to be the first messiah sent to Africa, in fulfillment of what he describes as divine instruction, Okronkronyi Nyame Somafo Yawo has overseen the construction of what he calls the Third Temple of God in Ekumfi Otuam, Ghana. According to his teachings, the first two temples were the Kaaba in Saudi Arabia and the Temple of Solomon in Israel, making the Ghanaian structure the latest and final sacred center in God's unfolding religious plan. His teachings emphasize the absolute oneness of God and identify the personal name of the Most High God as Rabbi, pronounced Rabi. He also claims to be writing the Tumnwoma, or Book of Power, which he says is being dictated to him by the greater angel Gabriel. He further teaches that the sacred language of Asomdwi Ntonton Som is Fante Twi, and claims to perform healings through verbal command and the laying on of hands, practices he associates with earlier messianic figures. Thank you for watching Ghana Newspapers Newsroom. This is Nana Mensa Adinkra. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, click the bell icon for notifications, and follow and like GH Newspapers across all our social media platforms. Catch you next time.
Hello viewers, I am Sandra. Welcome to the Ghana Newspapers Newsroom. Today in the studio, we examine an important cultural and historical topic titled, How Valentine's Day Evolved in Ghana, from the Gold Coast era to today. We explore how a Western observance gradually transformed into a uniquely Ghanaian tradition, known widely today as Chocolate Day. In pre-colonial Ghanaian societies, including Akan, Iwe, Ga, Dagomba, and others, there was no indigenous festival equivalent to Valentine's Day. Love, courtship, and marriage were governed by traditional rites, family negotiations, and customary law rather than a single calendar date. During the Gold Coast colonial period, Christian missionary schools introduced Western calendars, literacy, and foreign observances. By the early to mid-20th century, Valentine's Day was known in select Christian schools in Accra and other colonial towns. However, it remained largely school-based and religious, not a public or national celebration. From the 1970s through the 1980s, Valentine's Day gained quiet popularity among secondary school and university students. Card exchanges, chocolates, and small gifts became common on February 14th, particularly within Western-style educational institutions. In the early 1990s, national newspapers barely mentioned the occasion. However, the liberalization of Ghana's media landscape changed everything. Private radio stations such as Radio Gold, Joy FM, and Peace FM began promoting Valentine's Day with love messages, competitions, and themed programs. Researchers note that Ghanaians did not merely imitate Western culture. They adapted Valentine's Day to local urban youth culture, reshaping its meaning. By the early 2000s, Valentine's Day became highly visible on campuses and in urban centers, though rural participation was still limited. A defining moment came in 2005, when the Ghana Tourism Authority, in collaboration with Cocobod and the Cocoa Processing Company, launched National Chocolate Day. The goal was simple yet strategic: promote local chocolate consumption and connect love with Ghana's cocoa heritage. By 2007 and 2008, February 14th in Ghana had become widely known as Chocolate Day, giving the celebration a distinctly national identity. In the digital age, Valentine's Day interest now peaks online from late January to mid-February. Young adults between the ages of 25 and 34 dominate Valentine-related searches, purchases, and social media engagement. Retailers, e-commerce platforms, and content creators intensify promotions annually, reflecting Ghana's dual cultural framing. Today, Valentine's Day, or Chocolate Day, is firmly embedded in Ghana's social and commercial life. Celebrations include gift exchanges, romantic dinners, hotel events, church programs, and vibrant social media campaigns. Economically, the season boosts floristry, hospitality, fashion, chocolate production, and local entrepreneurship. In summary, Valentine's Day in Ghana evolved from a colonial school observance into a nationwide, localized celebration tied to cocoa, commerce, and digital life. Valentine's Day in Ghana is not merely a Western import. It reflects how global practices are reshaped by local institutions and Ghanaian values.
The end of the transatlantic slave trade in the 19th century is often presented in historical narratives as a clear moral victory led by European abolitionists. However, in reality, the process was complex, uneven, and frequently misrepresented, particularly in early newspapers and colonial reports. In the region now known as Ghana, selective reporting played a crucial role in shaping public understanding of abolition, often emphasizing imperial benevolence while minimizing African agency, economic disruptions, and the persistence of coercive labor systems. Britain's passage of the Slave Trade Act of 1807 marked a legal turning point, making it illegal for British ships to participate in the slave trade. This was followed by aggressive naval patrols along the West African coast aimed at suppressing illegal trafficking. Later, the Slavery Abolition Act of 1833 formally abolished slavery within the British Empire. However, newspapers both in Britain and the Gold Coast tended to present these legislative acts as immediate and comprehensive successes. In reality, illegal slave trading continued for decades. Portuguese, Spanish, Brazilian, and American traders remained active, and clandestine operations persisted well into the 1860s. Early reporting rarely acknowledged this gap between policy and enforcement. Instead, newspapers often portrayed abolition as swift and definitive, reinforcing the narrative of British moral leadership led by figures such as William Wilberforce. By the mid-19th century, missionary presses and colonial newspapers had begun circulating in the Gold Coast. Publications often framed abolition within the broader ideology of the civilizing mission. Articles emphasized that British rule had liberated Africans from barbaric practices, presenting colonial expansion as a humanitarian intervention. This selective framing ignored several critical realities. European demand had been the primary driver of the slave trade. African societies had complex systems of servitude that differed from plantation slavery. The transition to colonial rule often replaced slave labor with forced labor and exploitative taxation systems. By omitting these complexities, newspapers reinforced imperial legitimacy and justified expanding colonial administration. Another major aspect of selective reporting was the marginalization of African resistance movements. Throughout the 19th century, many African rulers and communities actively resisted both slave trading and colonial control. Some coastal leaders negotiated trade reforms, while inland states restructured economies away from slave exports. Newspapers of the period rarely highlighted these indigenous initiatives. Instead, abolition was depicted primarily as a European achievement. This omission erased the roles of African diplomats, merchants, and reformers who facilitated economic transitions toward legitimate commerce such as palm oil, rubber, and cocoa. The end of the slave trade caused significant economic disruptions across the Gold Coast. Many states that had depended on slave trading revenue experienced political instability and shifting power dynamics. For example, warfare patterns changed and commercial elites had to adapt to new forms of trade. Yet newspapers often downplayed these economic challenges. Instead, they focused on success stories of emerging industries, especially agricultural exports. By the late 19th century, reports celebrated cocoa cultivation led by pioneers like Tete Kwashi as proof of successful post-slavery economic transformation. While cocoa indeed became a cornerstone of Ghana's economy, such reporting overlooked the difficult transition period and the labor exploitation that accompanied plantation expansion. Perhaps the most significant omission in abolition-era reporting was the persistence of forced labor under colonial rule. Systems such as indentured labor, compulsory public works, and taxation policies compelled Africans to work under conditions that closely resembled earlier forms of coercion. Colonial newspapers seldom described these practices as exploitation. Instead, they framed them as necessary for modernization and infrastructure development. This selective language shaped public perception, masking the continuity between slavery and colonial labor regimes. The selective reporting of abolition profoundly influenced historical memory in Ghana and beyond. For decades, textbooks and popular narratives echoed colonial-era framing, emphasizing European humanitarianism while minimizing African complexity. Only in the 20th century, particularly during nationalist movements, did Ghanaian scholars and journalists begin critically reassessing these narratives. They highlighted African participation in both the slave trade and its abolition, as well as the structural inequalities that persisted after legal emancipation. Selective reporting on the end of the slave trade illustrates how newspapers function not merely as sources of information, but as instruments of power and ideology. By emphasizing imperial morality, downplaying African agency, and ignoring ongoing exploitation, early press narratives shaped a simplified and often misleading historical record. Understanding these biases is essential for reconstructing a more accurate history of abolition, one that recognizes both the global forces involved and the complex roles played by African societies in the transformation from slavery to colonial modernity. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, click the bell icon to receive notifications for all our latest updates, and follow and like GH Newspapers on all our social media platforms. The history of slavery and abolition in the area now known as Ghana is deeply intertwined with global economic systems, imperial expansion, African political structures, and the emergence of print journalism as a powerful instrument of public opinion. From the 15th century through the 19th century, slavery evolved from localized systems of servitude into a vast transatlantic commercial enterprise. By the time abolitionist movements gained traction in the 19th century, newspapers had become critical tools that shaped how societies understood, justified, or condemned slavery. Before European arrival, forms of servitude already existed in many West African societies. Among the Akan, Ewe, Ga, and Dagomba communities, slavery was often domestic and integrated into kinship systems. Enslaved persons, frequently war captives, debtors, or criminals, could marry, own property, and sometimes assimilate into their captors' families. This system differed fundamentally from chattel slavery that later developed under European influence. However, these indigenous structures laid a social framework that European traders would later exploit. When Portuguese traders arrived along the Gold Coast in the late 15th century, they encountered existing networks of trade and political alliances that facilitated the expansion of slave exportation. From the 1500s onward, European powers, including the Portuguese, Dutch, British, and Danes, constructed coastal forts such as Elmina Castle (1482) and Cape Coast Castle. These forts became central nodes in a global trading system linking West Africa, Europe, and the Americas. By the 18th century, the Gold Coast had become one of the most significant slave exporting regions in Africa. Historians estimate that between 1.5 and 2 million enslaved Africans were transported from this region alone. African intermediaries, including powerful states like Asante, played roles in capturing and trading prisoners of war in exchange for firearms, textiles, and other goods. The abolition movement gained momentum in Europe during the late 18th century, driven by religious groups such as Quakers and evangelical reformers. In Britain, figures like William Wilberforce spearheaded campaigns that culminated in the Slave Trade Act of 1807, which outlawed British participation in the transatlantic slave trade. Later, the Slavery Abolition Act of 1833 formally ended slavery within the British Empire, including the Gold Coast. However, abolition did not immediately dismantle forced labor systems. The 19th century saw the introduction of print media in the Gold Coast largely through missionary and colonial initiatives. Early newspapers such as the Gold Coast Times, founded in 1874, and later publications like the Gold Coast Chronicle played crucial roles in shaping political discourse. These newspapers emerged during a period when abolitionist rhetoric was already dominant in European political culture. The way slavery was discussed, reflected both colonial perspectives and African elite viewpoints. Newspapers framed slavery through several dominant narratives. The moral civilization narrative portrayed abolition as evidence of European moral superiority. The African elite reform perspective used newspapers to critique lingering forms of domestic slavery. Writers argued for modernization through dismantling traditional servitude. The economic transformation narrative highlighted the transition to legitimate trade, particularly in palm oil, cocoa, rubber, and gold. By the late 19th century, the cocoa boom, led by pioneers like Tete Kwashi, became symbolic of post-slavery economic transformation. The political resistance framing challenged colonial narratives, arguing that taxation and forced labor resembled new forms of exploitation. The role of newspapers in framing slavery and abolition had lasting consequences, helping construct national memory by emphasizing moral redemption. Today, sites like Cape Coast Castle and Elmina Castle stand as both historical monuments and educational centers, emphasizing resilience and historical accountability. The story of slavery and abolition in the Gold Coast shows the role of newspapers as instruments of power, shaping memory that persists today. The struggle for self-governance, Ghana's most important idea from the Gold Coast era to today. If there is one idea that has mattered more to Ghana than any other from the Gold Coast era to the present, it is the struggle for self-governance and accountable leadership. From colonial domination to modern democracy, Ghana's history has been shaped by a single powerful question: who governs us and in whose interest? This question has defined our politics, inspired resistance, fueled nationalism, justified coups, and continues to influence public debate today. British colonial rule formally began in 1821, and by 1874 the Gold Coast was declared a crown colony. Governance during this period was imposed from above, with little regard for indigenous political systems or popular participation. Resistance emerged through traditional authorities, merchants, and educated elites who opposed unfair taxation, land expropriation, and exclusion from decision-making. The formation of the Aborigines Rights Protection Society in 1897 marked a turning point as it successfully challenged colonial land policies that threatened communal ownership. Newspapers such as the Gold Coast Aborigines and later the Accra Herald became platforms for political debate, showing that demands for self-rule long predated independence. After World War II, calls for self-governance intensified. The 1948 Accra riots, sparked by the shooting of ex-servicemen protesting economic hardship, exposed deep failures in colonial administration. The United Gold Coast Convention, formed in 1947, and the Convention People's Party, established in 1949 under Kwame Nkrumah, transformed elite protests into mass political action. Their demand was clear and revolutionary: self-government now. This struggle culminated on 6th of March 1957, when Ghana became the first sub-Saharan African nation to achieve independence. Independence brought freedom, but it also introduced a new challenge: how to govern ourselves responsibly. While Nkrumah pursued rapid modernization, growing centralization of power and laws such as the Preventive Detention Act raised concerns about accountability and political freedom. These tensions remain among the most debated aspects of Ghana's early post-independence history. In 1966, Ghana's first military coup overthrew Nkrumah, claiming to restore accountability, though through undemocratic means. Between 1966 and 1992, Ghana experienced cycles of civilian and military rule. Each regime promised better governance, discipline, and economic stability. Yet repeated coups revealed a painful lesson. Removing leaders without building strong institutions does not guarantee good governance. This era showed that self-governance is not only about who holds power, but about systems that limit power. The return to constitutional rule in 1992 marked Ghana's most sustained effort at accountable self-governance. Regular elections, a free press, and peaceful transfers of power have earned Ghana international respect. Still, the core questions remain: corruption, institutional independence, media responsibility, and whether democracy is delivering economic justice. This shows that the struggle for self-governance did not end in 1957. It evolved. Self-governance remains Ghana's most important national idea because it defines our dignity, our responsibility, and our future. History teaches us that freedom without accountability is fragile, and development without participation is unsustainable. Ghana's progress depends not only on elections, but on an informed and engaged citizenry willing to question power, just as our ancestors did during the Gold Coast era. From 1821 to the Fourth Republic in 1992, these milestones define our journey. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, click the bell icon to receive notifications for all our latest updates, and follow and like GH Newspapers on all our social media platforms. The growth of newspaper readership in the Gold Coast, modern-day Ghana, cannot be understood without examining the critical role played by 19th century mission schools. These educational institutions, established by European Christian missions, were not only centers of religious instruction, but also engines of literacy, intellectual transformation, and political awareness. By producing a new class of literate Africans, mission schools created the very audience that would later sustain the rise of newspapers and public discourse in colonial West Africa. Origins of missionary education in the Gold Coast. Formal Western-style education in the Gold Coast began in the 18th century with European trading companies, but it expanded significantly in the 19th century through missionary efforts. Protestant missions such as the Basel Mission, the Wesleyan Methodist Mission, and the Roman Catholic missions established schools across coastal and inland communities. One of the earliest and most influential institutions was founded at Cape Coast by the Wesleyan Methodist Missionary Society in the 1830s. These schools focused on teaching reading, writing, arithmetic, and Christian doctrine. Instruction was typically conducted in English, though missionaries also translated religious texts into local languages like Twi, Ga, and Yu. The primary objective of mission education was religious conversion. However, the unintended consequence was the creation of a literate African elite, capable of engaging with written materials beyond the Bible, including newspapers, pamphlets, and political tracts. Literacy as the foundation of newspaper culture. Before the spread of mission schools, literacy rates in the Gold Coast were extremely low, and communication relied primarily on oral traditions. Newspapers, introduced in the late 19th century, required a readership capable of reading and interpreting complex texts. Mission schools fulfilled this need by producing a new social class: clerks, teachers, catechists, and merchants who were proficient in English literacy. These individuals became the primary consumers of early newspapers such as the Gold Coast Times, established in 1874, and later publications like the Gold Coast Chronicle. This emerging literate class also formed the backbone of the colonial bureaucracy, as many graduates were employed in administrative roles. Their daily interaction with written communication reinforced habits of reading, which naturally extended to newspapers. Mission schools and the rise of African intellectualism. Beyond basic literacy, mission schools cultivated intellectual curiosity and critical thinking. Students were exposed to European political philosophy, Christian moral teachings, and global history. This exposure shaped their worldview and stimulated engagement with contemporary issues such as colonial governance, trade policies, and social reforms. As a result, many early African newspaper editors and contributors were mission educated. Figures like J.E. Casely Hayford exemplify this trend. Educated in mission institutions, Hayford became a lawyer, journalist, and nationalist leader who used the press to advocate for African self-governance. Mission schools thus functioned as incubators for a new African intelligentsia that would dominate newspaper readership and production. Newspapers as extensions of missionary influence. In many cases, early newspapers were directly linked to missionary activities. Mission presses printed religious newsletters, educational materials, and later secular publications. These publications often promoted Christian values, moral reform, and social modernization. Mission-educated readers tended to trust printed materials because they associated them with authority and enlightenment. This trust significantly boosted newspaper circulation. However, missionary influence also shaped editorial perspectives. Early newspapers frequently reflected Christian moral frameworks, advocating temperance, education, and civilized social behavior, while sometimes criticizing traditional cultural practices. Geographic expansion of readership. Mission schools were initially concentrated along the coastal towns such as Cape Coast, Elmina, and Accra. Consequently, early newspaper readership was largely urban and coastal. As missions expanded inland during the late 19th century, literacy spread into interior regions. This expansion gradually broadened the geographical reach of newspapers, transforming them from elite coastal publications into more widely read platforms. By the early 20th century, mission-educated teachers in rural areas often served as local opinion leaders, reading newspapers aloud to communities and interpreting their contents for non-literate audiences. Political awakening and nationalism. Perhaps the most profound impact of mission schools on newspaper readership was their role in fostering political consciousness. Literacy enabled Africans to access information about global events, colonial policies, and nationalist movements. Newspapers became vehicles for political debate, enabling educated Africans to critique colonial rule, advocate reforms, and mobilize public opinion. Many nationalist leaders, including Kwame Nkrumah, emerged from mission school backgrounds and used newspapers as tools for political activism. Thus, mission schools indirectly contributed to the rise of nationalism by creating a literate public capable of engaging with political journalism. Long-term cultural and social impact. The influence of mission schools extended beyond the colonial era. They established a lasting culture of reading and intellectual engagement that continues to shape Ghana's media landscape today. Modern newspaper readership patterns still reflect the educational foundations laid by missionary institutions. High literacy rates, strong print traditions, and vibrant public discourse can all be traced back to the educational transformations initiated in the 19th century. Conclusion. Mission schools played a foundational role in the development of newspaper readership in the Gold Coast. By promoting literacy, nurturing intellectual elites, and fostering critical engagement with written texts, they created the social conditions necessary for a thriving press culture. Although originally designed to advance religious objectives, mission schools ultimately became catalysts for broader social change, enabling the rise of journalism, political awareness, and national identity formation in Ghana. Thank you for watching Ghana Newspapers Newsroom. Once again, I am Sandra. Do not forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, click the bell icon for notifications, and follow and like GH Newspapers across all our social media platforms. Thank you for staying with us.
Hello viewers, I am Kwabena Nyameke Mawuli. Welcome to the Ghana Newspaper Sports Room. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, click the bell icon to receive notifications for all our latest updates. And follow and like GH Newspapers on all our social media platforms. Long before Ghana was known by its modern name, sport and physical competition were already embedded in the social, political, and spiritual life of its people. From the ancient kingdoms of the Gold Coast to independence in 1957 and into the modern republic, sports have played a powerful role in shaping Ghana's identity. Today, we explore how sports were born, nurtured, and transformed in Ghana, from indigenous traditions to colonial influence and post-independence national pride. Before European contact, sports were essential tools for survival, discipline, and cultural expression. Traditional activities included wrestling, stick fighting, and hunting competitions. These activities trained warriors, built courage, resolved disputes peacefully, and formed central parts of festivals and rites of passage. When Europeans arrived in 1471, cultural exchanges slowly influenced local leisure activities. Soldiers introduced military drills and organized physical training. Under British colonial administration, modern sports like football, cricket, athletics, and boxing were introduced through mission schools. Schools became major centers for development. Football arrived in the early 1900s and quickly became the nation's most popular sport. By the 1920s, leagues were forming nationwide, uniting people across ethnic backgrounds. Before independence, sports became symbols of resistance and unity. Stadiums turned into spaces where national pride and anti-colonial consciousness grew. After independence in 1957, sports became a major nation-building tool. The Black Stars rose to dominance, winning major African championships. Today, Ghana continues to gain global recognition through football achievements, Olympic success, and international boxing champions. Sports remain pathways for youth empowerment, national unity, and global visibility. The story of sports in Ghana reflects the nation's broader journey, from tradition and colonial struggle to independence and global excellence. Sports continue to preserve culture, strengthen unity, and project Ghana's identity to the world. Traditional wrestling competitions in coastal Gold Coast communities, a window into social power and cultural identity from 1820 to 1900. Long before colonial stadium lights and organized leagues, the sandy shores and village squares of the Gold Coast, today's Ghana, were vibrant arenas where traditional wrestling was among the most respected cultural practices. From the early 19th century up to the turn of the 20th century, indigenous grappling contests were not mere entertainment. They were deeply embedded in social structures, rites of passage, intercommunal rivalries, and the very fabric of coastal community life. In coastal communities such as Jamestown and Ushertown in Accra, Salt Pond and Winnabar along the central coast, and Asebu and Anamabu further west, wrestling was known by varied names and forms, often linked to local languages and age-old traditions. Among the gay people of Accra, the proto-wrestling form of Asafo Atwele was practiced by age sets and militia groups as a symbolic continuation of martial preparedness and bravery. These contests took place on beach sands or open squares and involved grappling, throws, balance holds, and endurance challenges. Victory was not just about physical strength, it demonstrated courage, strategy, and eligibility for leadership roles. Fanti fishermen of Salt Pond and Winnabar also viewed wrestling as a marker of prestige and community reputation. Young men trained from adolescence, learning discipline, honor, and technical skills. Elders presided over matches during major festivals, awarding winners with gifts, ceremonial cloth, and social recognition that could even influence marriage negotiations. By the 1820s, villages such as Jamestown, Ushertown, Salt Pond, Winnabar, and Anamabu were already hosting annual wrestling contests tied to fishing and harvest seasons. These events attracted large crowds and transformed coastal settlements into major cultural gathering centers. One celebrated figure was Kofi Brofo Mensah of Winnabar, who lived between approximately 1851 and 1884. He was renowned for his unique grip technique and ability to defeat much larger opponents. Oral traditions recount his famous victory during the 1873 fishing festival, which elevated his village's prestige across coastal networks. Later in the 1880s and 90s, wrestlers such as Kwame Asibuo, Ahanta, and Yor Nana Nyami of Salt Pond became widely respected not only for strength, but for their ceremonial importance. Wrestlers were often seen as symbolic protectors and representatives of community resilience. Traditional wrestling was closely tied to major festival cycles. Ritual drumming, libations, and elders' proclamations framed each contest as an act of communal affirmation rather than simple sport. In places like Asebu, annual gatherings brought together fishermen and wrestlers from different ethnic communities, strengthening alliances and social bonds. Wrestling success could influence leadership opportunities, marriage arrangements, and age group responsibilities for village defense. By the late 19th century, British colonial influence and missionary activities began reshaping sports culture. European games such as football and boxing were introduced, but traditional wrestling persisted. Instead of disappearing, it adapted and remained central to cultural identity, especially during festivals in Jamestown, Salt Pond, and Winneba well into the 20th century. Traditional wrestling competitions between 1820 and 1900 were far more than physical contests. They were rituals of governance, symbols of unity, and powerful expressions of identity. Wrestlers like Kofi Brofo Mensah, Kwame Asibuo Ahanta, and Yor Nananyame remain enduring symbols of cultural pride and resilience.
Indigenous physical games played by Fante fishermen along the coast. Along the wind-carved coastline of southern Ghana, among the Fante, physical games were never idle diversions. They were social rehearsals, training grounds for endurance, hierarchy, and communal rhythm. Two in particular, Atentam and Osibia, stand out in the historical record. Atentam derives from the Fante and Akan root tam, meaning to push, to press, or to force against. In practice, Atentam was a form of traditional wrestling performed on sandy beaches after fishing expeditions or during communal gatherings. Contestants aimed to push an opponent off balance until his back touched the ground. Victory brought more than applause, it conferred prestige. Among fishing communities where physical stamina determined survival at sea, Atentam functioned as both entertainment and an informal selection mechanism for leadership and respect. Archival research notes Atentam as a strength-based contest embedded in pre-colonial Akan coastal society. Early European observers often remarked on the powerful physiques of Gold Coast fishermen, indirectly affirming the physical culture that games like Atentam reinforced. If Atentam was confrontation, Osibia was coordination. The word is believed to stem from Akan roots linked to rhythmic movement and group jumping. Osibir was performed in two facing lines, often during full moon nights, or fishing taboos when the sea was ritually resting. Participants leapt in synchronized patterns to drum rhythms, testing agility, timing, and collective discipline. Unlike wrestling, Osibir blurred sport and ceremony. It strengthened communal bonds in towns where cooperation at sea, hauling nets, steering canoes, and reading tides was essential for survival. These games were not peripheral amusements. They were coastal institutions, social technologies forged in salt, sand, and surf. Atentam trained the body for resistance, while Osibir trained the body for rhythm and unity. Together, they reveal a worldview in which survival, celebration, and strength moved in one continuous tide. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, click the bell icon to receive notifications for all our latest updates, and follow and like GhNewspapers on all our social media platforms. The Atlantic as living arena. Along the Atlantic edge of the pre-colonial Gold Coast, long before European forts punctuated the shoreline, the sea was already a theater of movement, daring, and communal pride. The coastal societies of present-day Ghana, particularly the Fante, Ga, and related Akan maritime communities, did not encounter the ocean as a boundary. They inhabited it. And within that intimate maritime world, the dugout canoe evolved from a tool of survival into an instrument of spectacle, recreation, and competition. Engineering the dugout, technology and mastery. The canoe itself was a technological achievement of striking sophistication, carved from a single massive tree trunk, often silk cotton or other hardwood species. These vessels were engineered to endure heavy Atlantic surf. Historical scholarship on West African maritime culture emphasizes the centrality of the canoe in political, economic, and social organization. Far from being primitive contraptions, Gold Coast canoes were hydrodynamically efficient and capable of carrying large crews and cargo through turbulent breakers. Shoreline proving grounds. In settlements such as Elmina, Cape Coast, and Accra, the shoreline was a daily proving ground. Fishermen launched through punishing surf, timing their strokes to the rhythm of incoming waves. Young boys observed, learned, and eventually joined. Skill in canoe handling, particularly in negotiating the surf zone, became both a necessity and a social currency. It is within this culture of mastery that recreational canoe racing likely flourished. Sport without separation. Pre-colonial sport on the Gold Coast was rarely segregated from daily life. Physical competition, whether in wrestling, hunting, or aquatic feats, served communal purposes. Entertainment, training, and reputation building. As documented in studies of indigenous sport in pre-colonial Ghana, aquatic skills formed part of informal youth training systems, sometimes described as bush schools. These were not schools in the European sense, but community-based institutions where boys acquired martial discipline, endurance, and technical knowledge, including canoe navigation. European observations and maritime skill. European observers arriving in the 15th and 16th centuries frequently remarked on the extraordinary dexterity of Gold Coast canoemen. Accounts compiled in maritime histories describe African paddlers outmaneuvering European boats in the surf, demonstrating superior speed and balance. Kevin Dawson's more recent scholarship on African maritime traditions further illustrates how swimming, wave riding, and canoe play were culturally embedded long before modern water sports were codified. From labor to contest, it is not difficult to imagine how functional surf launches transitioned into organized or semi-organized contests. A crew that reached the horizon first, a youth who cut across a breaking wave with sharper precision, or a rival fishing group that returned to shore ahead of another. These moments would have drawn cheers, wagers, and pride. In communities where identity was often organized around lineage and occupation, canoe prowess reinforced status. Ritual, language, and maritime identity. Language itself reflects this intimacy with water. Among the Fante, the annual Bakatoué festival marks the opening of the fishing season. Bakatoué translates as opening the lagoon or draining of the lagoon, symbolizing renewed engagement with marine life. Although primarily a fishing festival, its rituals highlight the ceremonial and performative dimensions of canoe culture. The canoe was not simply a means of transport. It was an emblem of continuity between ancestors, sea gods, and living communities. Among the Gay of Accra, oral traditions suggest the diffusion of certain surf techniques from Fante mariners, evidence of inter-ethnic exchange along the coast. The canoe, in this sense, functioned as both vehicle and vector of cultural transmission. Recreational racing would have strengthened such bonds while sharpening maritime skills. Recreation embedded in life. It is important to emphasize that pre-colonial canoe racing was not sport in the bureaucratic, rule-bound modern sense. There were no standardized lanes, no fixed regattas. Instead, competition was embedded in work rhythms, festival cycles, and youthful bravado. The line between labor and leisure blurred, and perhaps that is the most revealing sociological insight. In the Gold Coast's early coastal settlements, recreation did not require separation from daily life. It emerged organically from it. Skill, sea, and social memory. The Atlantic was both teacher and adversary. To race upon it, even informally, was to declare competence in the face of a force larger than oneself. And in doing so, early Gold Coast communities transformed survival skills into communal celebration. That transformation, practical necessity becoming performance, is the quiet origin of canoe racing along Ghana's coast. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, click the bell icon to receive notifications for all our latest updates, and follow and like GhNewspapers on all our social media platforms. The qualification of the Ghana national football team, popularly known as the Black Stars, for the 2006 FIFA World Cup stands as one of the most transformative milestones in Ghana's sporting and national history. It was not merely a football achievement, it was the culmination of decades of ambition, near misses, institutional reforms, and a generational shift in Ghanaian football. Ghana's football pedigree dates back to the late colonial era, when the sport became a powerful symbol of national pride. Under the leadership of Kwame Nkrumah, football was heavily promoted after independence in 1957 as a unifying national project. The Black Stars quickly became continental giants, winning the Africa Cup of Nations in 1963, 1965, 1978, and 1982. Despite this African dominance, qualification for the FIFA World Cup remained elusive for decades. Near misses in the 1962, 1970, and 1994 qualification campaigns left the nation frustrated. By the 1990s, Ghana possessed abundant talent but struggled with administrative instability within the Ghana Football Association, inconsistent coaching strategies, limited infrastructure compared to North African rivals. Although Ghana's youth teams dominated globally, winning the FIFA U17 World Cup in 1991 and 1995, translating youth success into senior national achievements proved difficult. The late 1990s and early 2000s marked a strategic transformation. Ghana increasingly relied on Europe-based players gaining elite tactical experience. Key figures emerged: Stephen Appiah, captain and midfield leader; Michael Essien, dynamic powerhouse; Samuel Kuffour, defensive anchor; Solly Muntari, rising midfield star. The appointment of Serbian coach Ratomir Dujkovic in 2004 was pivotal. He introduced tactical discipline, modern training structures, and a cohesive team philosophy. Ghana entered the African qualifying group stage, facing formidable opponents: South Africa national football team, Democratic Republic of the Congo national football team, Burkina Faso national football team, Cape Verde national football team. The qualification system was brutal. Only the group winner advanced. June 2004, Ghana versus South Africa, Accra. A decisive 3-0 victory signaled Ghana's seriousness and energized national belief. September 2005, Cape Verde versus Ghana. A dramatic away victory kept qualification hopes alive. October 8, 2005, the decisive moment. Ghana defeated Cape Verde 4-0 in Kumasi, while South Africa lost to Burkina Faso. This result secured Ghana's first ever World Cup qualification. The final standings placed Ghana at the top of the group with 21 points. The qualification sparked nationwide celebrations across Accra, Kumasi, and beyond. Streets filled with jubilant fans waving flags, marking one of the largest spontaneous public celebrations since independence. For many Ghanaians, qualification symbolized national resilience, international recognition, youth inspiration, economic optimism. Football once again became a powerful instrument of national unity. At the tournament in Germany, Ghana stunned the world, lost narrowly to Italy national football team, defeated the Czech Republic national football team 2-0, beat the United States men's national soccer team 2-1. Ghana advanced to the round of 16, an extraordinary debut achievement, before losing to Brazil national football team. The 2006 qualification fundamentally reshaped Ghanaian football. 1. Elevated Ghana's global football reputation. 2. Inspired massive youth participation. 3. Triggered infrastructure investments. 4. Attracted international scouting attention. It also paved the way for Ghana's later World Cup appearances in 2010, 2014, and 2022. More than a sporting achievement, Ghana's qualification for the 2006 World Cup marked a symbolic intersection of history, identity, and global recognition. It represented the moment when decades of ambition, talent development, and national belief converged into a historic breakthrough that forever changed Ghana's sporting narrative. Thank you for staying with us on GhNewspapers Sports Room. Once again, I am Kwabena Mawuli. We truly value your time, your trust, and your commitment to staying informed. As always, our mission is to bring you accurate, timely, and reliable sports news that matters to you and your community. Do not forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, click the bell icon for notifications, and follow and like GhNewspapers across all our social media platforms. Good day, and stay informed.
Hello viewers, I am Nasifa. Welcome to the Ghana Newspapers newsroom. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Click the bell icon to receive notifications for all our latest updates. And follow and like GH Newspapers on all our social media platforms. Long before Ghana had a film industry or digital streaming platforms, music was the country's most powerful form of entertainment. And highlife became its loudest voice. From colonial ballrooms to roadside bars and global stages, highlife music has shaped Ghana's cultural identity for more than a century. Highlife music emerged in the late 19th and early 20th centuries during the Gold Coast era, blending traditional Akan rhythms, sea shanties, brass band music, and European ballroom styles. The term high life comes from the elite social clubs in coastal cities like Accra, Cape Coast, and Sekondi, where the African middle class danced to live bands. For many, hearing high life outside these clubs symbolized luxury and modernity. By the 1920s, palm wine guitar music spread high life beyond the elites, reaching workers, farmers, and traders. From the 1930s to the 1950s, high life became a voice for storytelling and social commentary, addressing love, hardship, colonial injustice, and African pride. Bands like the Jazz Kings, Cape Coast Sugar Babies, and especially E.T. Mensah, the king of high life, popularized dance band high life and made it the national sound. As independence neared, high life echoed the people's optimism and political awakening, often performed at rallies and celebrations. After Ghana's independence on 6 March 1957, high life entered its golden age. The new nation embraced it as a symbol of African modernity and unity. The government supported cultural expression through state-sponsored bands, radio broadcasts, and cultural institutions. Legendary artists like E.T. Mensah, King Bruce, Nana Kwame Ampadu, and Osibisa carried high life beyond Ghana, influencing West Africa and the diaspora. By the 1960s and 1970s, high life was Ghana's premier entertainment export. Economic hardship and political instability in the 1980s affected live band music. Nightclubs closed and many musicians emigrated. Yet, high life adapted with electronic instruments and studio recordings, keeping the genre alive on radio and cassette tapes. Artists such as Amaki Dede and Daddy Lumba dominated this era. Today, high life remains the foundation of Ghana's entertainment industry. Modern genres like hip life and Afrobeats draw heavily from high life rhythms and storytelling. Contemporary stars sample and honor high life legends, proving its timelessness. High life influences Ghanaian films, festivals, national celebrations, and global African music platforms. High life is more than music. It is Ghana's historical soundtrack. From colonial Gold Coast to the digital age, it has recorded love, struggle, joy, politics, and identity. It connects generations and continues to evolve. Key historical dates: 1890s. Early high life influences emerge. 1920s, palm wine. High life spreads nationwide. 1940s, 1950s, E.T. Mensah popularizes dance band. 1957, independence ushers in the golden age. 1970s, high life dominates entertainment. 1980s, modern high life emerges. 2000s to present, high life influences hip life and Afrobeats. Few business stories have shaped Ghana as deeply as cocoa. From a small experiment to the backbone of our national economy, cocoa transformed the Gold Coast and laid the foundation for modern Ghana's economic identity. The story began in 1879 when Tete Kwarshi, a blacksmith from Mampong, returned with cocoa pods. He successfully planted them in the forest zones, and by the 1890s, cultivation spread across Ashanti. Unlike colonial mining, cocoa was grown by African farmers, a rare example of indigenous capitalist success. By 1911, the Gold Coast had become the world's leading cocoa producer, overtaking Brazil. Cocoa exports financed railways, roads, and ports, fueling urban growth in Accra, Kumasi, and Sekondi. Revenue also funded education and early nationalist movements, fueling political consciousness. Low prices led to famous boycotts by cocoa farmers in 1937, one of our earliest mass economic protests. In 1947, the Cocoa Marketing Board, now COCOBOD, was established to stabilize prices and protect farmers. At independence, cocoa accounted for 60% of Ghana's foreign exchange. Under Kwame Nkrumah, cocoa revenue funded major projects like the Akosombo Dam and new factories. However, falling world prices and mismanagement in the 70s reduced incentives and output. Economic reforms in 1983 revived the sector through better pricing and farm rehabilitation. Today, Ghana remains the world's second-largest cocoa producer, supporting millions of rural livelihoods. Strategies now focus on value addition, local processing, and chocolate manufacturing. Cocoa is more than a crop. It is Ghana's longest-running indigenous business success story. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, click the bell icon to receive notifications for all our latest updates, and follow and like GhNewspapers on all our social media platforms. Covered later by the Gold Coast Gazette and missionary newsletters, the signing of the Bond of 1844 formalized colonial judicial authority. Later colonial press publications referenced the bond as the legal cornerstone of British rule, shaping narratives about law and order. During the early 19th century, the Gold Coast was home to complex political systems and established customary legal institutions. British involvement initially focused on trade and diplomacy, especially after the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade in 1807. However, concerns about regional instability and conflicts among local states led British authorities to seek a legal framework. They sought to address indigenous judicial practices like trial by ordeal, aiming to legitimize their role in governance. The Bond of 1844 was signed by British colonial representatives and several coastal chiefs, primarily from Fante states. Framed not as a conquest treaty but as a consensual agreement, it aimed to promote peace, justice, and social order. The bond introduced formal recognition of British legal authority over major criminal offenses, reducing traditional judicial autonomy. It also included the prohibition of certain indigenous practices deemed inhumane, including trial by ordeal. Lastly, it allowed for the conditional preservation of customary law in civil cases under British supervision. Later, colonial-era press consistently cited the bond as the legal foundation of British rule, portraying it as voluntary consent. Over time, the bond weakened African judicial sovereignty as British courts expanded their jurisdiction. The Bond of 1844 is pivotal. It marked the start of formal British legal control and justified further colonial expansion. It demonstrated the strategic role of treaties in imperial governance, a legacy central to discussions on sovereignty today. The Bond of 1844 was a crucial legal instrument establishing British colonial rule, leaving a lasting impact on Ghana's history. I will be discussing an important historical and technological journey titled How Communication Technology Transformed Ghana from the Gold Coast Era to the Digital Age. Few technological developments have reshaped Ghana as profoundly as the advancement of communication technology. Modern communication in the Gold Coast began in the 1870s, when the British introduced the telegraph system. By 1881, telegraph lines connected Cape Coast, Elmina, and Accra. Alongside the telegraph, the postal service expanded, enabling the rise of early journalism and nationalist debate. Radio emerged as a powerful technology in the 1930s. In 1935, radio broadcasting was formally introduced in the Gold Coast through relay systems transmitting BBC content. By 1954, the Gold Coast Broadcasting System, later renamed the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation, was established, providing local voices with airtime and unifying the nation. After independence in 1957, Ghana invested heavily in telecommunications. In 1974, the creation of Ghana Posts and Telecommunications marked a major step in national infrastructure. The 1990s marked a turning point as Ghana liberalized its telecom sector. In 1996, mobile telephony was introduced, and the National Communications Authority was established to regulate the sector. Ghana was among the first African countries to gain full internet connectivity in the mid-1990s. Key milestones include the landing of the SAT-3 cable in 2008 and the Main 1 cable in 2010. Today, digital technology underpins Ghana's economy. It has expanded access to education, strengthened democracy, and positioned Ghana as a West African digital hub. The digital acceleration era saw mass internet access, the mobile money revolution in 2013, and the rollout of the Ghana card in 2017, integrating identity and finance. As Ghana advances into artificial intelligence and 5G, our journey stands as proof that infrastructure, when democratized, can reshape a nation's destiny. We now dive deeper into the digital acceleration era, a period from 2010 to 2026 that truly redefined our daily lives. Between 2010 and 2012, we saw the dawn of mass internet access. Improved speeds and reduced costs led to cyber cafes flourishing and social media shaping youth communication. In 2013, the mobile money revolution took hold, driving financial inclusion. By 2015, affordable smartphones accelerated digital journalism across the nation. 2016 saw the rise of digital governance with online passports and tax systems. In 2017, the Ghana card rollout integrated identity, finance, and governance. 2018 brought the digital addressing system, making every location accessible. By 2019, 4G expansion fueled youth-led innovation in AI and agritech. In 2020, COVID-19 made digital dependency a reality, with remote work, online education, and e-commerce dominating our economy. The 2021 e-levy debate highlighted the digital economy's importance, while 2022 saw a massive expansion in locally relevant fintech and edtech startups. By 2023, AI adoption grew. In 2024, digital payments became the heartbeat of our mainstream economy, creating a truly cash-light society. Looking to 2025 and 2026, 5G expansion and smart solutions in health and agriculture position Ghana as a leading digital society in West Africa. Our digital journey is a testament to our resilience and innovation. Ghana's history and the birth of politics, from ancient kingdoms to modern democracy. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, click the bell icon to receive notifications for all our latest updates, and follow and like GhNewspapers on all our social media platforms. Long before the name Ghana was adopted in 1957, the land and peoples of the Gold Coast had already developed sophisticated political systems. Politics in Ghana did not begin with Europeans or colonial rule. It evolved from indigenous governance structures, customary laws, military leadership, and trade diplomacy spanning centuries. The birth of politics in Ghana is therefore a story of African statecraft, colonial resistance, intellectual nationalism, and ultimately self-rule. 1. Indigenous political systems before European contact, pre-1400s. Early Ghanaian societies were organized around centralized and decentralized political systems. Akan states such as Bono, Akwamu, Denkyira, and Asante were governed by kings known as Omanhene, councils of elders, and queen mothers called Ohemaya. Leadership was not absolute. Rulers governed by consent and could be removed. In northern Ghana, the Dagbon kingdom was ruled by the Yana, supported by a structured hierarchy of chiefs and land custodians known as Tindanas. Among the U states, such as Anlo and Peki, governance was more decentralized, emphasizing council leadership and consensus. These systems were guided by accountability, collective decision-making, and customary law, an early form of democracy. 2. Politics through trade and diplomacy, 1400s, 1800s. The arrival of the Portuguese in 1471 introduced new political dynamics. Coastal chiefs negotiated treaties. European forts like Elmina Castle became centers of power. And access to firearms reshaped internal politics. By the 18th century, the Asante Empire emerged as one of Africa's most advanced political systems. The Asantehene ruled as a constitutional monarch. The Asanteman Council functioned like a parliament. And the golden stool, Sikadwa Kofi, symbolized national sovereignty. The Asante political system rivaled many European states in organization and legitimacy. 3. Colonial rule and the birth of modern politics, 1821-1900. In 1821, Britain took formal control of the Gold Coast. Indigenous rulers were subordinated, laws were imposed without African representation, and economic exploitation intensified. Political resistance emerged, notably through the Bond of 1844, which forced chiefs into legal agreements, and the Ya Asantewa War of 1900, a powerful armed resistance against British authority. Politics became a struggle between colonial dominance and African sovereignty. 4. Rise of educated elites and political consciousness, 1890s, 1930s. Western education produced lawyers, journalists, and teachers who demanded reforms. The Aborigines Rights Protection Society, founded in 1897, became the first organized political pressure group, opposing land expropriation through petitions, newspapers, and legal advocacy. Newspapers such as Gold Coast Aborigines, the African Morning Post, and the Accra Herald became powerful tools for political mobilization. 5. Political parties and mass nationalism, 1940s-1957. The United Gold Coast Convention, founded in 1947 by leaders including J.B. Dankwa and Pa Grant, demanded self-government. Kwame Nkrumah later formed the Convention People's Party in 1949, introducing mass politics with rallies and youth movements. And the slogan, "Self-Government Now." The 1948 Accra riots marked a turning point, shifting politics from elite circles to the streets. 6. Independence and the birth of the Ghanaian state, 1957. On 6 March 1957, the Gold Coast became Ghana, the first sub-Saharan African nation to gain independence. Key achievements included African-led governance, a Republican constitution in 1960, and Pan-African leadership. Kwame Nkrumah famously declared, "The independence of Ghana is meaningless unless it is linked up with the total liberation of Africa." 7. Post-independence politics. Coups, constitutions, and democracy, 1966-1992. Following independence, Ghana experienced military interventions, beginning with the 1966 overthrow of Nkrumah. Democracy was restored with the 1992 Constitution, ushering in multi-party governance, peaceful transfers of power, and strengthened democratic institutions. Ghana's political history is not borrowed. It is rooted in African governance, strengthened by colonial resistance, and refined through democratic struggle. From the golden stool to the ballot box, Ghana's politics reflects leadership with accountability and vision. Thank you for watching Ghana Newspapers Newsroom. Once again, I am Nasafa. Do not forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, click the bell icon for notifications, and follow and like GH Newspapers across all our social media platforms. For continuous coverage, tune in again at 7 p.m. Thank you for watching.
This is Ghana Newspapers Newsroom. Live coverage. Real-time updates. Preserving Ghana's story. Empowering its digital future.